I'm just going to dive into my poems. So I have this poem, this book is pretty much a long poem. And it's a little bit difficult to read from in terms of the fragments all speak to each other. So I'm going to try to, I've chosen the poems that seem most self-contained. And the first is titled After April. Above the industrial pit, children haul banana leaves, yellowed, behind them as if dragging giant tails. It's raining hearts, fat, one bursts open. After a detective discovered April's body, after a line by Lucille Clifton, after I walked out into summer and fell into my mom's arms, after sundown, stars' tail ends fall off. Agamben writes, racism alone can justify the murderous function of the state. All the gourds drying, all the rotten seed heads winded and lightened, an impossible address. An insect's breath is to the earth's breath one and the same. And cut out, and her April's voice, and how she lost it to this nation amidst a display of fireworks. And it fucks with me. My son is calling out for me. April would call and say, just to hear your voice. A poet's life. And sticky feet, the cicada molt stuck in sap, and that silver sugar bowl, and the fear that I was sick, my son was sick, and the pain in April's leg, and the siren speaks for her, and the unaccountable and totally lost, and yet blood still flows from a 30,000-year-old mammoth named Buttercup. Animals move through air or water, creating vortices or whorls that then form a wake. Anxiety at night that I will die, abandon my child. April died and moths emerged and ate up all the green. April in a casket, skin gray, April's yellow dress sways. Army ants swarm, volunteering their own bodies. Around the casket, arteries pump as bridges, other ants cross over. Fatally kneeling on the neck of. Feather fell from the sky, felt so foreign. Field mice rolled in mud. Fighting would have someone else killed. Filming. Flowers stayed up to worry for the disappearance of themselves. How much detail to give a cloud? How can blood suddenly stop traveling to one limb and fell my best friend? How common such loss is. How do we stomach all the punk? I erect border lines out of fear, mimicking the territorial war of the fungi who leave in their wake boundary lines of melanin and pigment, black, brown, green, yellow, orange, red, that glow with a brilliant, sometimes even neon color. How quickly all we know can be extinguished. How silent it is, watching the weak. How to describe the extreme blue. I hear cut cedar crying in the far field. I bend and pick, I sing, I gather. I dream of April standing luminous before a hayfield. I fear for my son in this place where flags wave. I feel something let loose inside me. I find myself awake at night, the gentle owl of my heart flapping in an attempt to wake itself. I have been showing my son the vanishing point. I have to ask, did April die? I have to ask. Door of no return. I may as well write April, killed by racism, age 38. So in this following poem, there's a reference to this idea that pizza is a code word. And I only found this out a long time after I received the phone call that's in this poem, but Pizza is a code word it was at Guantanamo for delivering people to a torture room. I pass women sewing at their singers and a blind albino child. I once walked and ran great distances. I once wanted to vanish. I once wrote letters to a prisoner at Guantanamo. The letters always came back opened. One day, shortly after I interviewed the police chief, famous for fashioning the restraint chair prisoners are strapped into for force feeding, I received a call. Someone on the other end laughed and then said they were calling from Guantanamo to order pizza. I order white supremacy is terrorism t-shirts. The shirt Patricia Acoma wore on July 4th, 2018, the day she scaled Lady Liberty, armed with a modest proposal. In a democracy, we do not put children in cages. I pee in the woods near deer droppings. I pick ticks off the dog. I plunge my hands in hot water, chop onions. I pour water from one bucket to another. Already, the large bucket is empty. I read of a man released from Guantanamo now raising pigeons. I read of terrorist training cells. I release the string to my son's flexible flyer and he's off shrieking like I used to. I remember all the places I had to journey to. I remember as a child melting snow off my mittens on a wood stove and just how that snow sizzled. My son now does the same thing, removes his gloves right over the iron surface on purpose. Snow from his gloves zigzags atop the black stove. I remember my father running around with a tennis racket, chasing after a bat. I remember the day my father handed me an article about human flying squirrels. I remember talking with April. I remember what it was like to think I was safe, that my dad could protect me. I replayed Darnella Fraser's video in my mind. I ran down the road, clutching a jar of blackcurrant jam. I said stupidly to April, I've had my heart do weird things. I see home in Horace Pippin's paintings. I'm thinking about the woods where I was reared and what they did to me. I'm walking in the dark. I see now. I sell $150 of ice cream by the end of the day. I'm the top seller. High girl of the day, says George. I said at John Brown's farm, Brown never really lived here, and most blacks who settled here moved on. Brown, the white revolutionary, fancied himself a father of freed men come to homestead. Look here at all that commemorates him as contrasts what is left of my friend. I sit on a pickle jar. I speak to someone of not feeling safe. Flags flying correlate with the absence of face masks. How quickly the zoning changes, how targeted we are. I take a flower out of my son's bike chain and watch. I tell him about the creaking gate, my dad in the ditch. I tell my son a story now in which he and his friend flee Trump supporters. They fly on magnetic brooms underground. He and his friends monkey chuck coconuts at one Trump supporter who keeps shooting the nuts until he is buried in coconut water. I tell the tale as we drive past the most rickety homes, still flying Trump Rambo flags. I think my son and I were shot at yesterday on the drive home. There's no other sense to make of the sound so loud and close. No rock could have hit the car with such force and not broken something. The crack must have been a bullet. I think of April at the sink untwirling her updo. I think of X's bright shoelaces. I think as long as the walk around my father cut through the wood exists and my son walks it, he will be okay. My father's ghost will guide him. I try to whisper to my son to look the other way. I used to talk to April's mother. I wake up in the middle of the night and wonder who the Uber driver was who ferried April. I wake with these words for April. I watch rain clouds gather. I'm looking at a photograph of a bearded Romaine Tenney on his hay mower hitched to a draft horses in a half-cut field. Tenney, whose Vermont farm was slated to be swallowed by Interstate 91, immolated himself rather than be forcibly moved. My son says, I may go off on an adventure, but I will always come back here. He points to the ground. Tenney went off to war, came back, didn't leave ever again. He was offered resettlement funds when the interstate was zoned, but what would such funds mean to someone partnered with a specific meadow? Our neighbor's barn is full of hay, despite it having been inordinately wet, so wet mushrooms explode across the forest floor. Tiny fungi are probably sprouting in the hay bales too. Meanwhile, chanterelles sit in wet towels in our fridge. Inside dead trees, fungi battle, erecting zone lines, secreting pigments of obnoxious hues. Such spalting is also evident in humans as differing skin, hair, and eye colors. Place colors us. Cornrows are cane rows in the Caribbean. When I was growing up here in Vermont, kids used to close the bus windows whenever we passed the stinky farm. A boy named Cecil with an enormous cowlick in his sandy hair got on at that stop. I always envisioned the cows licking him. Tenny, even in arthritic pain, refused the electric milk machine neighbors tried to foist upon him. He milked by hand and let all his animals go before setting fire to his house with him in it. The rain is soft. I wish I knew where to put the grief. There is nothing, no gutter. Everything floods. The confusion is even nature's own. The earth's eminent domain is unarguable. She'll right herself, but will we? This summer, my son and I built a paddock, felling dead trees for posts with a handsaw and an axe. That is when April called, out of breath. Get a second opinion, I told her. This was after April's mother died. April hadn't known what to do with her mother's house in a neighborhood that wouldn't give her its worth. She stopped instead for a security system. She shopped instead for a security system. We know homelessness is a measure of belonging, not a lack of home ownership, she once wrote. When forcibly removed from any real relationship with place, person, animal, who then are we, April? This poem is called Marcescence, and it's the term of when leaves stay on throughout the entire winter on a tree, and they're still there in the spring. Yeah. Of ash, of boatmen, of death and what comes after, of doorposts, of everyone I cannot see. Of late, there's been a fight over the old maple, the last remaining marker of Tenny's farm, and at one time the farm's centerpiece. The tree ultimately was felled as the town feared for the safety of those who parked their cars. This part of the old farm is now a park and ride under it as it aged, of mostly found material to recall trauma. Thrombosis. To abjure grief or rage, refusing, like Walter Benjamin, to accept the linear ravages of history, taking in the ruin, to be alive on others' bones, to build a bunker that withstands a rain of fire, to give back all that was stolen, to remember anything, to the grand narrative that is myth, to the raccoons tipping over the chicken food, together alone, tomato stems encircled in string so as to raise them up. Tomorrow we will continue to say goodbye, Alfred says, rifling through photographs of the dead. This is the last poem I'll read. What is spiritual and fine? Were the children, the white questioner asked, hostages? What a death knell as contrasts my memory of our wind-up record player, Fat Albert slowing down as the crank slowed, my father's laughter, the grass we lay upon. What can be said? Death eviscerates the thrumming of us, April. What can I say? I try to write, I erase. What can we learn from viruses? There is no us and them, just a gradually blending and shifting mix of DNA. What do I do with these letters that will never reach you, April? What do we do with the love all the way through? Bathymeter, my mom says, speaking of measuring the depth of the lake we cross, 400 feet here at its deepest point. What does it mean that everything keeps barreling on? What does it mean to return to a mother who still gardens? What does it mean to save a fly from a bucket of water, to build a bunker that withstands a rain of fire, to hunker in a basement, living out one's faith that freedom is a moral ground? What happens to the soul then amongst all the endless color? What have I done, O Lord, the name of an ox 4,000 years old? What I see is terror. What I see in myself is terror. I see it as I yell at my son, as I attempt to warn him of the dangers. What is spiritual or fine cannot be enjoyed out in the cold on concrete pilings. The song of the earth blows kisses. What is the grainy video of Baghdadi's compound exploding? What am I looking at? Why, why? Cradling my head and not understanding who we are? What species? Okay. And now I'm going to introduce Karin, or I'm not introducing her, I'm welcoming her. And I think she's going to read a couple poems from her newest manuscript. And then we'll have a little conversation.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Spring. It was really, really wonderful to hear those poems. I adore your book. I just really appreciate your inviting me to do this with you, and I'm grateful to Tyler and to Writers and Books for hosting this. Yeah, I just think it's a
Description
really
of yourself. You need a description.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is Karin Gottshall, and I'm a middle-aged white woman with graying hair and glasses on. So yes, Spring and I talked a little bit about kind of the commonalities in our work, and I think, one of the things that I've been really focused on for the last many years now is kind of writing, we're starting to write about personal loss, about grief. And my mother died about 10 years ago. Her death actually like coincided exactly with the publication of my second book, my last book, which is called The River Won't Hold You. And she was only 65, and so, and women in my family tend to live a long time. So I just always assumed we'd be little old ladies together. But she had an aggressive cancer, and it all happened really quickly. And I was just left really stunned by it, and kind of have really struggled to articulate that grief. And I think that's one of the things that I really admire about Spring's book. Just the way she's really shaped a container for grief, and kind of I think, my part of my difficulty was always feeling like, oh, you know, I've gotta be okay enough to write about this, or I've got to get to a place where I can sort of have some perspective about it. And Spring's book, I think, is kind of a lesson in just kind of writing out of the moment that you're in. And I think, I admire the courage of that a lot. I'm gonna read some poems from the manuscript that I'm working on now that are kind of approaching that grief. And then I guess Spring and I will talk a little bit about, we have some questions for each other about the differences between our work and how this work was made. So this one's called The Daughters You Didn't Have. The daughters you didn't have are doing fine without you. They're playing house in the particle accelerator. The children by the deli meat case have smeared the glass with sticky handprints, and you remember how, heartbroken at 20, you woke up in a tent outside of London, buttery dawn through ripstop nylon, crying babies, little lambs in the thicket. And this one's called A Common Occurrence. My mother died on her birthday in a white room in the hospital's old wing when I stepped out for coffee. 10 minutes tops, though I'd been there for days listening to her breathe. The nurses said that happens more than you'd think. Once the life support is removed, the family sits at the bedside a week sometimes, and then the person dies while everyone is out for a smoke. After I had 1 hour to sit with her, the brain cannot make sense of a person converted to object. I kept seeing her move. It seemed important, so I told the aides who finally came in to clean her that it was her birthday. I said I knew she was dead, but I kept seeing her breathe, and I laughed a little because it seemed crazy, but maybe it meant something. And they said, yes, that happens all the time. Um, this one's called Inheritance. Her books, her plants, her ancient cat, her dream journals, her sweet tooth, her Versa, her childhood tap shoes, expired meds, $400 in dimes, they broke the coin star. An antique christening bonnet, a walker she never had the chance to use, her cherry bed, her paintings, her chicken bones stashed in a basket by the back door, her insomnia, her sewing machine, a shed full of saws, her ashes, her guitar, her ADHD, her Ritalin, 117 pads of Post-it notes, a closet full of broken lamps, her corkscrews, her boots, too big, her drapes, her dresser, her kettles, her board games, the ring she wore to the hospital and gave me one day when she could still talk. Take this, it's nice, but I won't need it anymore. This one's called The Stones. Walked an hour or so along the railroad tracks. Chicory and Queen Anne's lace. Buzzing sun came home with a tick on my knee. Who decided on the sound of the dial tone? When was the last time I heard it? Time isn't spent like pennies. It is the fountain the pennies are thrown into. The neighbor's motion detector goes off when the fox walks across the lawn. Last thing I remembered before I died was dropping a needle with a hiss onto the spinning black disc of my mother's favorite Stones album. I think I'll read one that's a little bit longer. This one's it's called Camera Obscura, and I don't know, I read this on uh, um on Friday at a reading, and some people didn't know what a camera obscura was, so I guess I'll just give a little explanation of that. So like a pinhole camera is a camera obscura, but it happens sometimes accidentally, like in a room where there's like some small aperture in a wall or in a curtain or something, and it creates like an upside down, like a reversed upside down image of whatever's outside in the room. And my childhood bedroom was a camera obscura, and it was so confusing to me when I was little. I thought that I had some magical power or something. So it's something I'd been trying to write about for a long time. So camera obscura. The neighbors called the cops on Mom and me the night we had to break into our own apartment. Not as dramatic as it sounds. We'd left the kitchen window open a crack, and I was 7 and skinny enough to shimmy through. I hadn't thought of it in years, but last night I dreamt of that neighborhood, our building. It had become a kind of prison for the dead, a heavy gate preventing entrance, and I spoke to my mother through the iron bars. When I see her like that, she never mentions her death or the time that's passed, but I often get the feeling she'd rather not be bothered. If dream people are aspects of ourselves given voice, then who inside me is she? She's so angry. Or if she's my mother for real and I am granted these visitations, then I think she'd prefer I just move on. When I remember my childhood bedroom, I think of the ceiling on which, through some small gap on sunny days, I saw projected a bird's eye image of the parking lot behind the building. I remember lying on my bed, looking up as her gray car pulled into its space. I felt like a spirit floating above the blacktop, watching her bend to pet the neighbor's cat before she dug in her purse for a cigarette. How long have I been haunting her? After I slipped through the kitchen window and set my palms on the cold tile floor, I unbolted the lock to let her in. Soon the reds and blues bounced off the eggshell walls, and the officers had to write a report, even though the neighbors came over and helped clear everything up. We all had a good laugh. She didn't tell them we'd been at the bar, an omission so weightless it floated. And anyway, I liked the bar. I liked the walk there and the walk home, holding her hand. I liked that I fit through the narrow opening of the window and the feeling when I touched down and had that moment alone in the darkness to decide whether or not to open the door and let her in. Um, and I guess I'll just read one more. This one's called Claim. I spent most of fourth grade in outer space, those red pants with the slight flare, this restlessness obviously not new, ruined with everything translucent. One fevered day in bed, another, my mother in the kitchen cooking a fish. When I light a cigarette, our bus will come, she always said, and it did. Ground under her heel. Lemon-scented soap, pine sap, roses, a jump rope truth I can no longer access. In dreams, my mother is without substance, without dimension, without love, an empty boat. Day like a heavy black kettle. The half-asleep feeling I could go back and claim it. A cup of coffee forgotten on the windowsill. A conjugation of the verb to haunt. Okay. So those are my poems. And I Spring and I have some questions to ask each other. And we'll see how that goes. It might just turn into a conversation, but we'll I definitely have some questions for Spring about her work because I just admire it so much. And I think I'll start with this with asking about the structure of the book, which I just think is ingenious. And I've wondered kind of where in the writing process that structure emerged. I mean, it just feels so inevitable as I'm reading the book, and especially given so many of the themes in the book and the inclusion of the son and also just the way grief is, grief makes kind of beginners where like every grief is is sort of a new it's a new experience no matter how many times we've been through it before. And so I feel like the alphabet, just feels like such a good sort of way to think about like, just trying to like wrap your head around the difficulty of that, if that makes sense. So, and it also just feels like, I don't know, I mean, my grief felt really like uncontainable. And so I really, I think the ABECEDARIUM form worked so well for this collection. And I'm curious about like at what point in the process that emerged and what that felt like.
Oh, thanks for reading your poems too. And I mean, maybe my answer can kind of encapsulate also why I love your work. So I think my initial way of writing this was just like a call. I was so used to writing with April and sharing writing. April was a poet, and calling her and just, having this dialogue. So I think my initial response was just to keep that going, attempting to keep that going. And so I started writing what things that were poems that seemed like poems, but I also knew, I think I'm probably like an action painter poet where I just like splatter things and then I clean up the mess at some point too. Um, and April, when I first met her, was working on these, she was making essays out of like text blocks, like quilts. And my parents had been involved in the Geese Bend. My parents were activists during the civil rights movement. My father was forming cooperatives, so they were like integral to the cooperative formation of Geese Bend. And April was using the quilt ladies, their talk and their idea of, just using what was at hand, using in some way their language in order to kind of like make these poems. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about I had this great aunt Kate, my dad told me about, who would she was kind of crazy and she kept nail scissors in her pocket and she liked to do puzzles, but she would just cut, if the puzzle piece didn't fit, she would just cut it. And then she would end up with art. The final thing would be art. And I think I really was, I mean, that kind of like remains with me. So for a while I was thinking, oh, like I'm making these things, but they don't work. So I'm going to tear them apart because they can't contain what I feel. So I would just rip them apart. And then I thought, oh, I wanted to have variations. So this kind of like jazz like structure of like, I wanted to keep having the same book but in different ways. And I have the same manuscript that was like a finalist for other like I have the same manuscript multiple times but in a different form. So I think I was searching for form, and I didn't really have an end point to form. Like I don't feel like there's no container. So this was one of the ways of containing these like fragments. But in saying that, I think the reason that I like your work is because it is contained, because it does feel like there's a way of distilling something that feels undistillable, or there's a way that you interact with that feeling of being haunted, right? I don't know. And in that camera obscura poem, you turn it around and you're the haunter, which is really, really beautiful and interesting and intriguing to me because that's kind of like the way that the camera obscura works too. Something else happens, like you're turned upside down and reflected back. So I don't know, I just think that that's often probably we're the hunters, of the dead, maybe.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a really new poem.
Mm,
So, I feel like I can see in my own work sort of this progression across time. But I think,
yeah.
I feel like in Phantom Number, it feels like this really sort of it feels like the work of like kind of a much shorter space of time, like this kind of
Mm,
intensity. And it's like there's a lot of other sort of markers of that moment in the book too, like,
mm,
it's, COVID and George Floyd, and it's like so
mm,
many sort of um, recognizable sort of touchstone moments in our recent history. And I guess, I mean, that's something I'm really interested in asking you about too, is like your book encompasses so much, it's really poignant, like as this kind of record of like personal loss and grief. Um, but that kind of extends out to sort of like where we are as a nation and kind of like where we are as a species, and asking that question and that repeated question of why try, that comes up in the the book. And um I think it's uh, uh I mean, the transitions between I'm curious about like how you do that. Like how you sort of bring everything in and it all feels like this consistent voice and this consistent sort of lyric register that like um I feel like
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I'm curious about that. I mean,
Yeah.
and how you manage those transitions or if they feel like transitions even or you know um yeah.
Um, I think, I mean, I think if I'm thinking about like the personal and the political, which I think that's the idea of the question, that I think that there's to me they're really conflated and I can't see through like they feel so it doesn't feel like a separation, but I do think um I mean I really feel like April, if April had had what she called the good insurance, she would still be here, or if she wrote this poem shortly before she died about her own she knew something was wrong, and she wasn't getting the medical attention that she needed, and she has this poem where she's asking the doctor, well, should I just like stay here or should I come back another day, right? And it's this like kind of devastating line, like should I come back another day, which she can't. And in that poem, she's kind of like talking about this hyperinflation of, how doctors disregard Black women's pain. And I just think about the way that, you know, politics falls on bodies. Like we can't escape the politics that we live within and that we embody, that we inhabit, that we're part of. And I think, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking that, I guess I wonder if we cared more in general, right? Like if this feeling of caring like across just like the human, the non-human, you know, um, I guess sometimes I wonder if we're just, we don't, we've lost that ability to care. And I kind of lump everything together. So that's my lumping, right? It's like it's coming out of this loss that could be called medical apartheid, but it's like it's so indicative of how I see, like, oh, it's just like people are disposable. Like this is whatever the fourth stage of capitalism. This is we've created this world and this is what we live in now. So I guess I think that's probably my answer to that.
Yeah, well, I admire it so much. I feel like like
Mm,
when I was in college studying creative writing and even as a even in grad school, way back when it was like there was some kind of movement, I think, away in the 80s from like including the late 80s, early 90s when I was doing all of that stuff. And I don't know if it was like a reaction to sort of political poetry of the 70s or something like it felt like there was this idea that like the political in poetry was somehow difficult to do,
mhm,
and I feel like I really internalized that in some way. And for me, it always feels like really, I think there's like this anxiety in me about bringing in, you know, some of those strongly held beliefs that like I would like to express in poetry, but that feels like if I always just kind of feel like the gears kind of clunk, in that in trying to make those transitions and stuff. So I think, you know, maybe just thinking of it as a transition is a problem, like you're saying that
yeah,
it doesn't feel like those things are not like I mean, and that's
they're
how
the
we,
same. Your
yeah,
work is
and
political, right? Like it's just,
yeah,
I think we think of politics as didactic, right? But it doesn't, I mean, I think part of it is that it's lived, right? And
yeah, right.
yeah, maybe we can't recognize it sometimes as that, or we don't recognize it unless we use certain language, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, it is how we live our lives, like our, the political experience is layered over, our personal griefs and joys and everything else. So, um, yeah. I see a message from Tyler here.
Oh, I think
Oh,
he's
yeah.
just commenting on some things we said, but
Yeah.
maybe I can ask you some question or a question too.
Okay. Okay.
If you want. I don't
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about, this idea of how m music runs through through your work, and you have this, like I think you were talking about feeling hollowed out by grief, and that I don't know, maybe this is about the containability or non-containability, but interested in how you have this, like throughout your manuscript, you have this bone flute, um and the wind is playing the bone flute. So I'm just thinking about like the way in which music comes to you, and thinking about that connection with your mother, what this the way in which music may have informed your way of working through in this new work.
Yeah.
If it's
Um,
conscious, it might not be conscious. So
I mean, I think it is conscious in some ways. Like I mean, I definitely like, and I read that poem, The Stones, about listening, about listening to my mom's Rolling Stones record. And I have like actually a couple of like companion pieces to that are not in the
Mhm.
manuscript yet, but might be
Oh,
just sort of
yes.
about like listening to
Mm,
her records, which is just like, I don't know, it's she was, she was a young mother, like in the 70s, and she loved music, and it was just something that we shared, like I loved her records, and I thought like her, we sang and danced to music together a lot. I mean, we had kind of a troubled relationship in some ways, and it was complicated, but that was like something that I feel like was always
mm,
something that we shared. And so, and after she died, I couldn't listen to music for quite a while, like any music, because it was just, it's like, um,
mm,
I feel like when I listen to
too
music, my
close.
emotions are just like right there. Like even if it's happy music, it's like too much somehow. And so, so that was one of the losses, I think, that was concurrent with her death, was just like not even having access to that pleasure. So I think um yeah, it's one of the ways in which I kind of memorialize her and our relationship, and also yeah, I don't know about the bone flute. It's interesting. When you asked me about that, I hadn't really thought of that as like, I guess it does appear a couple of times, and I um there's a I love the movie Cave of Forgotten Dreams, the
Uh-huh.
Werner Herzog
Yes. Yeah.
film, and there's like a scene there with a guy like playing a bone flute, like sort of
Mhm.
recreating like like these Paleolithic or Neolithic, people would have experienced living in these caves.
Mm,
And there's um there's just something about that idea of like the first, I don't I've always just been fascinated by the idea of like the first people to make music, or to figure out like, oh, I can turn this into an instrument, and like
mm,
what, what would that have sounded like? And
mm,
there's just like there's something about that sort of primal experience of like music and art that I'm just in love with thinking about, just like because I think for me, um my own experiences as like a beginner with art. Like I think I was telling you the other day about like the first time in elementary school we wrote haikus in class, and I
Oh,
was just
yeah.
like, I just want to do this. Like, can this be my job? Like, just right. And I think like whenever I've learned an instrument or practiced any art, it just feels so expansive. And I think it's like mind altering, really. And I think that's
Mm.
I I guess I'm just trying to capture that a little bit in my poetry. And
I
yeah.
think what you said too about primal, like it being primal, I think death is so primal, right? Like I don't know how, I mean, in order to get close to it, to rendering anything like it, right? I think that's the turn kind of goes to the primus, like some kind of primal. Um, I don't know. I think that also thinking about the imaginary children, the imagined life that's in your work, I think that also somehow like tunes into that same primal need, right? Like need for comfort, I think. Is that what I don't know.
Yeah, comfort and companionship and
Mm,
um yeah.
yeah. I think that might be our time, but I'm not sure. Tyler,
Yeah.
what do you think? We have more questions prepared, but we can always.
I think that is a great
Another
place to
one.
stop, but I did want to make sure if anybody who's joining us tonight wants to ask a question,
Mhm.
um, you could type that into the chat or you can send it through the Q&A feature down below. But yeah, we do have a couple minutes if anyone's got any questions. Um, yeah. Well, why don't yeah, if you have one more question, Spring, for Karen, that would be great, and then that'll give people a chance to if any someone's hand. Oh, I thought I just saw somebody put their hand up. Maybe not. Maybe
Yeah,
that was me.
Eliza Tiles'
Yay,
name
Eliza!
just popped up.
I'll put them on the spot, allow to talk.
I'm sure they're
Hi,
excited
guys.
about that.
That was totally an accident.
Ah,
Oh, Eliza.
I can't make tomorrow night, but it's been really wonderful to hear both of you talk.
Aw.
Thanks for
And,
coming.
and I guess as I think about it, grief is such a heavy topic to write about and talk about. And I guess I'm curious, like, how you guys both feel now, like, obviously distant from some of the kind of main events, but still, grief is always with you, and how you feel kind of sharing this work that's from such an intimate place, and talking about it, and like how long it took you to really face it. So yeah, thanks guys.
Thanks, Eliza.
Mm.
Go ahead, Spring.
Oh God. Um, I don't know. I think I just lost another friend. So I think I'm gutted, but I think and it just brings it back. So I think the thing with trauma or with loss is that it compounds itself. And I don't know. I mean, I was just starting to feel like I could, be a full human being again. And I think maybe that's the arrogance of feeling like you can be somebody who like exists without pain in some way. Like I think the world is so full of pain, but oh, go Karen, you can here. How about
Yeah, I think thanks for that question, Eliza.
yeah.
It's I think sometimes it's harder than other times. It's like I feel like sometimes I do not want to read these poems, and it's um
Mm.
yeah, but other times it's kind of like telling me I feel like I'm telling myself a story a little bit too. It's like there is something sweet about having um that little I don't know, just this little song about and I do kind of think of my poems as like these little sort of songs that I sing to myself, and sometimes that's hard to share, and sometimes um I don't know. The thing is, like I feel like because I've read these poems many times in public, and people are often really grateful to hear them. It's just like the gratitude that I have for Spring's book, because she's expressing something so hard, and but that, we all experience in some way at some point. And I think it's a real, we don't talk about it as a culture enough, about loss. And we think that we're supposed to get over it quickly and not bother other people with it and all of that stuff. But I think people want to hear about it and talk about it, because it is a primal experience, and it's something we share, and it's nice not to feel alone in that.
I wonder too, I mean, I think in terms of feeling helpless, there's something about making something. And I think, like I think of art as spiritual food. I think of what we do as spiritual food in some particular way. So I think it's like it's a manner of communing, it's a manner of being with someone, and so in that way, I think there's I don't know, like it's super important to me, right? So if it can be important to other people, that's awesome too. Mm. All right. I think that's great. That's a good.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. That would be a perfect place for us to wrap up. And Eliza, thank you for that question.